It is critical for quality and validation professionals to stay on the pulse of emerging policies and regulations. From the FDA's Computer Software Assurance Draft to the newly released EU Medical Device General Safety and Performance Guidance, evolving regulations are a constant. Our network of professionals cover these topics and more in print, in person, and online, bringing the latest industry news and tools to our audience of hardworking experts just like you. The IVT Network gives you the tools you need to succeed in your profession, providing innovative content, industry research, lifelong learning, and opportunities for networking on a global level. For our listeners, receive 15 months for the price of 12 plus an exclusive discount with your new subscription. Subscribe today with IVT Network, the best decision you'll make all year for your life sciences career.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacy.
Welcome back to the Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. Our subscribers tune in for the latest industry news, networking, and education, and we are here to deliver big with today's episode. Providing the industry and our valued audience with topics and takeaways they can use, we present this clever exchange, originally part of our spring conference. We invite you to listen in this week to the CSA Revolution panel discussion, intended to provide a better understanding of the intent and scope of the FDA's Computer Software Assurance Guidance, while highlighting CSA's relationship to other existing regulations. Listen now to the group made up of moderator Senthil Gurumurthy and esteemed panelist FDA's Cisco Vicente, Ray Murphy, Ken Shitamoto, and Khalid Musali.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Senthil Gurumurthy here. I'm very excited to invite you all, everyone, for this first day of this conference and probably the second session and topic on CSA Revolution. And I'm sure you might have got a chance to hear about the CSA. I think you might have seen the similar set of folks from our team spreading across different conferences. And this is a right opportunity for us to even talk directly with FDA, right? Getting insights on where the CSA is and how the CSA needs to evolve, and what we mean by CSA Revolution by implementing in the industry. So you can see the speakers are Cisco Vicente from FDA, Ray Murphy from Boston Scientific, Ken Shitamoto from Gilead Sciences, and Khalid Musali from Compliance Group. Just one second. I think I'm just posting you the bio slide. I believe it gives you a much more hands-on view on the industry experts. And it is important for the audience to actually aware where these speakers are coming from, and we have been working very closely with FDA. Khaled goes way long with FDA, working with FDA on this topic, and it's a more important topic for us. I think the question is all about CSA, and this panel discussion is all about understanding the CSA better. There are a few terms you might have heard about: critical thinking over and over and again, risk management in different platforms. What do you mean by risk management? What do you mean by risk assessment? What do you mean by critical thinking? And then how we can apply CSA and where the topic of CSA can be applied, right? And how we can actually, what is the use of it and why CSA now? There are so many questions we can actually keep adding one on top of other. Right? And I believe that this discussion can provide you a better insight on how we can actually understand and apply CSA on the real world, and what actually CSA is all about as well, right? And it's an opportunity for everyone to listen in. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise those questions on the chat window. So our panelists will be in a position to provide their perspective and insights. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and I'll request Cisco to kick off this panel and providing the regulator's view and how do you see CSA is kicking on, and where do you see that we are heading to, and any insights that you are going to give away to the audience? Please just go ahead.
Sounds great, Senthil, and thank you for the opportunity and the chance here to really present, engage, and really cover what work we've done till now with regards to the CSA activities. On the end of the day, I think, and you'll hear a lot about this throughout the course of the discussion today, the goal is more or less to communicate that, this is something that has actually been in scope of what we've issued before in guidance, our interpretations. There is value, there's opportunity, and the end of the, end of the day of what we're trying to really get out of this is to reset thinking around the industry in order to accelerate and really bring in the adoption of these technologies, of the capability to get information, to get data, to really drive more insights into your organization that in the end really impact patient safety, patient quality, but have in some way, shape, or form really not been focused on, invested in due to maybe just our lack of clarity. And you'll hear more of it throughout the course of the discussion, impact it's had, how to get things really started and engaged. And we'll reaffirm that, again, a lot of these principles we've already said they're acceptable. In order to drive that clarity home, we've been really working on drafting a guidance that clarifies all these ideas, and we'll be moving that through our system. And that's in the process right now of its clearance and the several levels of review that it needs to go through. But hopefully, as you'll see, there's nothing that should stop you or does stop you from being able to take advantage of this and really driving some of the improvements and changes that this can deliver now. So I think with that, Senthil, I think we're ready to roll.
That's great. Thank you, Cisco. I appreciate it. And I think one of the topic I just want to go to Khaled. Khaled, you have been in this journey for quite long, right? So where do you think that, maybe give a perspective on CSA and as it stands now based on your long experience in implementing and working with many different diverse clients across the globe, right? So what would be an important takeaway you would like to give with respect to the topic of CSA itself, meaning there are lots of myths going around, right? And if you can give your point of view, and that would be a good starting point for our discussions further.
Sure. Thank you, Senthil, and thank you, everyone. So what's your note toward the long time because of the gray hair? Is that what it is? So the very first thing I want to say, and I think Cisco just really touched on it, you can start today, right? CSA is nothing new. It might have a label, a marketing label, CSA, but it had already existed many, many years ago. There's a lot of smart people in the industry that have really drafted guidance, come up with regulations, put guidance out there. So yes, the FDA is very smart. They got a lot of input from the industry. They continue to reach out to the industry. How can we help you? Help us help you, right? And therefore, Cisco's here with us. How can we help the industry, right? GAM5 has been talking about risk-based approach, critical thinking. Really, I'm one of the very few people do not read the entire GAM5, and I'm guilty as sin. I don't report now to my old manager when they used to tell me, "Did you read GAM?" I'm like, "Yes, I did." Well, I didn't. It's a lot of good stuff in it, but I used to just look for summaries and just do my work. But if you really dig deep into ISPE GAM or GAM5 that everyone lives by, all the concept about computer software assurance is in there. Yes, we came up with unscripted, ad hoc testing, etc. But again, this is just to help the industry move forward and automate, right? And move into automation. So again, we're all still within the current regulations. We're not violating anything. Thank you, Cisco, for saying yes. We drafted a guidance because a lot of folks, when we meet with other clients, is there really a guidance? Well, yes, there is. The people in front of you here on the screen have been working tirelessly for the past 4.5 years, coming up with recommendations, right, on how we can make your life easier as an industry practitioner. And yes, there is a guidance. Now, whether that guidance gets released or not, please move forward and do not wait for it. Camp 5 is talking about it. There's a lot of other things in the mix that will go through.
That's great. Thank you, Khaled. Yeah, a quick one. I think that there's a question came on that in the the FDA CSA guidance is anticipated draft CSA guidance is anticipated to be released in 2021. Cisco just confirmed it is. The goal is still there. I'm just raising it on that I don't know whether the responses can be seen by the audience.
No, and I think that's a fair point to answer them live. But yes, it is something that is on our A list. We have been working on this for a while, and the goal is to get that out and in the public domain this year. Obviously, COVID and all of the EUAs have had their impact on slowing things down, but it is moving its way through the system because it's something I think our center and I think more broadly soon, the agency is more committed to getting out and highlighting.
And I guess it's worth reinforcing as well, Cisco, that the people don't have to wait for the guidance to come out. Everything that we speak about and everything you hear today, you can implement right now and start saving and start right sizing and being efficient with your validations.
So 2 things to add to that. One, back to Khaled's point about his admission of not reading it. Khaled, you're not alone. It's clear from the conversations that people have not been applying and have not read fully. They just jump to M3. They don't read the front section, which talks about the philosophies and the thinking, because if they had, they would have been advocating CSA. Because, that's the frustration when we talk to the GAMP people. They're sitting there going like, we've been saying this for years.
Exactly.
The problem is everyone is looking for the easy fix. They're just looking for the table. They're shutting off their brain. And that is the exact opposite of what CSA is. And the guidance document is just one example of how to implement CSA. It is not the only way. It's not the only. It's got example tables in GAMP, in cooperation with GAMP when we put the GPG together. We listened to what they had to say. There were, many conversations with their CSV leadership. I went through many review boards, and it came together, and it morphed. It's different. It's going to have different thinking, and that's okay. To Ray's point just now, and to Khaled's point that, go ahead right now. Like, look, if you can only do what you've been told to do, the actual guidance doesn't really say very much. Look how many documents you have on CSV in the first place. If you're waiting for just regulation to dictate, you're not moving forward at all. And in fact, you've already moved forward in other locations. So this fascination to self-restrict in one area is something I want people to look at and think about.
No, I think that's a good point, Ken, but just want to reiterate, there is nothing against the current regulations right now, right?
Yeah, there's nothing against regulations, but if that's the only way, if you have to be explicitly told each time, I think we addressed that in the article in American Pharmaceutical Review, where we kind of talked about those fallacies. I'll read that offline. But everything within in the space, we've already are okay with risk-based approach. GAMP has already always talked about historically flexibility and leveraging vendor documentations. And look, think about it this way. Or you can go to a software as a service in a company and they completely just say like, hey, I'm going to risk assess away the entire val effort, right? I'm going to do a very, very light PQ. And other places will generate 20 volumes of documentation. Both are compliant. Compliance is not the standard that you should be applying, right? It is, does the system work for us?
Yes.
Is this fit for purpose? Can I trust my data? Did I do my due diligence as a company? The compliance aspects come second. It'll come naturally.
It's a byproduct of it, right? So basically, I think we have unfortunately flipped it. Focus everything by the name of compliance, but we forgot where we should be really focusing, which is actually the patient safety aspects of it, isn't it? So I think that you touched on a very interesting point, Ken. I want to, if you can elaborate further on one area where the GAMP and CSA, where exactly it is actually a segue, because I know the GAMP is already talking a lot about it, but the CSA is actually giving a flavor to it, because the way I would say is CSA is agnostic of any risk-based approach your organization is adopted for, because CSA can be applied for any risk-based approach organization. Some are GAMP-based, some are non-GAMP-based. Right? But CSA can be applied anywhere. So if you can touch on the GAMP and CSA, because that's a question people ask, because most of the time they are GAMP-based organization, and what is the CSA? Do I have to change the whole thing all over again? And what will happen to my existing validation strategy and approach, right? So these are all the questions that will be an implementation challenge. If you can give a color to that.
Yeah, sure. Let me walk through that. First and foremost, yeah, to your point, they're not mutually exclusive. They can live within the same space. You can implement them on a system by system. There's no need to go back and retrofit your existing val packages and to apply a new methodology. We heard that at one of the conferences. People are asking about it. If you were to look about it, what CSA does in actuality is it is by introducing concepts of modern testing, so such as exploratory testing, the unscripted testing, the ad hoc, and expanding your toolkit. What it is doing is that where it dovetails nicely into GAMP. Right? GAMP talks about risk-based models, and GAMP speaks of flexibility. You should have flexibility when you're looking at your vendors' testing. You should only document, take screenshots when they add value, as opposed to just taking them for everything. Those messages were kind of lost. Right? Those messages were lost in the implementations because people tended to measure their success by how many screenshots they took, how many pages they took. And in fact, they were always in this confirmatory thought. So if something was missed, right, they tended to go back and they added more test cases. So it was no longer a risk-based approach. Right? Because if there was a miss, even though you accept it, anytime you take a risk-based approach, you're saying, despite all my thinking, there's an element of chance, probability. There's an element of randomness that I've accepted. And yet, when they implemented GAMP, they went away from that. CSA talks about and gives examples of, like looking at, again, if you were looking at it, stepping back at the most essential essence, right? Risk-based documentation. Yep. Where you really look at it and you start applying, does this directly apply, hit safety? Does this directly hit quality? In those areas, I should have more documentation. And that inherently is aligned with your inspection risk. Because the inspectors aren't going to come and show me the login screen because I want to see whether that icon comes out. No, they're not going to look at the low risk requirements. They're going to go to the high risk requirements. And in fact, they always go to the system first. Yes. Right? You only go to the val documentation if you start questioning the validity of that system or your programs, right? Because you're going to want to say, show me the access controls of the system in production, right? Show me the, where you release this lot, right? Show me the generation of the CSV for this specific lot. They don't go, show me this stack of screenshots first, right? That's the secondary record. Well, that's why we say take care of your household forms. So GAMP and CSA, they're inherently synergistic. They're inherently both applying risk, where I think CSA goes a little further. It provides a little more guidance and a little more framework. So you just don't apply the M3 risk-based tables and then it says and then what? Because you don't know what to do. And CSA provides a reference model, but it's not the be-all end-all. In the conversations with GAMP, we talked about you could test even a high-risk requirement using a whole bunch of series of unscripted test cases, as long as each unscripted test case said what you're doing. For a simplistic example, audit trail. I test the audit trail. I test that it records the name. I tested, recorded the action. I tested, recorded the date. I don't need a scripted test cases as long as I'm able to confirm that all of those criteria were met. Now that's a simplistic example, but that's something that's there. I'll stop because I think I've rambled too much.
That's good. No, that's good. That's good. I think that's actually a good segue. I thought of going to Ray actually with that. Ray, do you want to add anything on that? And after that, I would also want to ask you if you can elaborate further on the modern testing approach, which Ken talked about, and what is your experience from your side on how those can be applied the way it is supposed to be, right? It gives you a better clarity on when to use unscripted testing or what it means, the scripted or unscripted in the first place, right? The whole concept is pretty new to this industry, right? So if you can provide colors to that, that'll be great.
Absolutely, Santil. So you look at a system, and what's important is you look at its intended use, and within that, what directly impacts the patient safety and product quality, or indeed the integrity of the quality system itself. And typically, every system is made up of a mixture of those. And where critical thinking comes into its own is you look at your system and what tool set am I going to use to validate this? I'm not going to take a sledgehammer to this and apply the same type of testing to everything. I'm also going to assess my vendor and look at their quality system and the testing that they have done, because there is no value in repeating all that testing again. Or if the vendor is deficient in some place, I can make an informed decision where I want to maybe beef up my testing. So it's all about, tailor fitting your validation approach based on the intended use of the system, bearing in mind what the vendor has done also. So I guess a big difference, which Ken alluded to earlier on, is within CSA, there's new testing techniques called exploratory testing and ad hoc testing. So I guess we're all familiar with traditional scripted testing, where you've got a test objective followed by step-by-step instructions on what the tester needs to do. And while they've got their place for high-risk function, they come with significant burden in that how often do we see a test case failed because there's a protocol generation error. And you've heard me say it before, and I kind of laugh, but it's true. Sometimes we test our test protocol more than the system that's under validation to scrub out all the tests. And it's true. I've seen it myself, and I've done it myself. Where CSA comes into its own, it's got depend for lower risk features and functions. It's got ad hoc and unscripted testing. So what's unscripted testing? Well, as Ken alluded to, it's you create a test objective, but how the tester meets that is up to the tester. And we're finding out that that's kind of better, because typically testers are executing more of the code in how to meet the test objective rather than just following the same path all the time. One, I guess, step lower than that is your ad hoc testing, where you only have where the tester records after the fact and the testing that they have done to verify a requirement. But again, you'd only use that for low risk functionality. So it's right sizing the validation tool set that you're going to use to ensure you get the maximum test coverage, to make the maximum use of your time with the system during a validation, rather than spending it trying to debug a test protocol.
Absolutely. So pretty much the thinking, foundational thinking here is focus more on product quality, right? The quality of the product itself. Right, yes. And then keep the documentation that is relevant, that is important to you, right? But build more quality to the product. I think that's important.
Yeah, and there's no silver bullet here. I mean, yes, these testing techniques are wonderful and they to be applied, but you got to spend time up front and doing a validation planning, which people aren't doing today. It's a one size fits all. Typically they're doing maybe too much of the wrong activity as opposed to focusing on the high risk areas.
So it's a beautiful point, I think, Ray, you mentioned, because it's an actual segue to the next question. This is one of the audience member raised the question: how would a small or even an upcoming company benefit from CSA or CSV, right? So what is your take on this, Ray? And then I'll go to Khaled on this one. So Ray, what is your thought?
I guess there's two reasons. I guess one, it's a necessary evil. I mean, we have to do software validation because it's a regulation. But what the beauty of CSA is, you're doing the right validation, you're right sizing it, and you're making the most use of your precious resources. Like, time is precious. Engineers' time is precious. You need to get your product to market, so it will help you get your product to market by doing the right activities.
Yes, yes.
Well said. Well, couple of things, and I like when Ray mentioned software validation. So we're not migrating from CSV to CSA. There is no migration here, just to make it really clear. You are still doing software validation. Yes, we want to do this. I know you hear it all over the net. Oh, it's time to move on. It's time to transition to CSA and forget about CSV. And that's not a true statement. Okay. We need to really clarify that. And that's what I clarify to a lot of our clients. The other thing, we need to stop validating software like we validate product. Okay. We continue to build this gigantic FMEA, right? Whereas, yes, it does apply to product, right? It does apply to software as a medical device and a medical device, to something really that impact the patient. But when you're talking about enterprise software that has low direct impact to patient, product, and data integrity, it is time to loosen up a little bit. In other words, chill, right? You need to automate your paper process. You need to move forward. We can't stay on paper, and obviously COVID-19 did really help push that forward, and organizations are starting to think about it, right? The FDA, for instance, and Cisco can speak to digital transformation. This has been going on for a very long time, and the FDA is really encouraging the use of automation. But organizations, industry, life science in general, are afraid of automation. Why? The one main reason that come up is validation. So maybe the word assurance will help them out a little bit.
That's great. I think, Khaled, I think this is something I want to go to Cisco with on this one. Talk about the current digital central health center of excellence under Bakul, and how the case for quality is empowered by that. If you can provide that color to that, because there is something happening since Q3 of last year, isn't it?
Right. I think that's a good point, because it goes to the idea of the agency is really trying to facilitate and drive a lot more of the assistance, right? Some bringing the right technical expertise together, not just within CDRH, but as broadly as we can from an agency standpoint, to make it very easy for this technology and these technologies to make their way forward. I think, as Khaled mentioned, we've learned, we were impacted by it. A lot of companies were impacted by it. When we've got that technology capability, we've got some of that data available, it makes organizations a lot more resilient, right? Capable to really adjust and move quickly when situations like what happened in the pandemic occur. Companies that were more invested in that, we saw their capability to at least sustain a bit better. So the goal here has been to really facilitate that happening. This is not something that the FDA doesn't support, right? We really do encourage that. As part of our efforts, we're trying to transform. We're trying to collectively get better about data. That means that, we need to have that data coming in and available, and that's not going to happen if people aren't investing in the technologies or driving that collective, infrastructure push moving forward. So one of the things we heard early on when all of this started was that the idea of CSV is a barrier. And this touches back on, I think, what Khaled addressed and one of the questions that came up. CSV, you've got to do it. Ray, he called it a necessary evil. But the reality is that it's just a necessity no matter what, right? And what we're trying to do is reset to what that necessity is and not make it about it being a regulatory burden. You're going to implement the systems. As you're a small company, this will help cut down some of the burden and focus you right on the risk discussion that really needs to be happening when you're moving forward. But it also frees up capital, time, and ways to implement technology that may help you as a small company to really get off the ground and help cut costs, drive your, the data that you've got available to make your cases as you present things to the FDA. It all starts to really blend together as we move forward. And the Digital Health Center of Excellence that was stood up was really intended to help be a focal point within the agency to keep pace with what's going on outside within the technology landscape, within industry, challenges that we're hearing like this, and how do we collectively as an agency move forward and tackle those? But at the same time, how do we provide at least a central resource for people to come and ask the questions?
All right, brilliant. Thank you, Cisco. So with respect to the way how we are moving, so do you see any how do you say that the collaboration among the FDA, CDRH, CDER, and CBER, and how that is happening with this Digital Central Health Center of Excellence? How is it? What is your perspective on where the FDA is heading towards in that space?
Yeah, so the Center of Excellence is just initiated and started, but this isn't the only effort that the agency has, right? There's a whole agency-wide push and focus on advanced manufacturing, for example, which all start to also touch into and feed in. There is a lot more work being done in bringing together the right representation and the right people from each of the centers to come together, discuss these things, and come up with collective solutions, bring up the purposes and the points. One of the things that we did and started with the CSA guidance was we started it as just CDRH running. We needed to make an adjustment and move forward. But a lot of this, as you've seen, applies elsewhere.
Yes.
A lot of the people follow GAMP, and this is very well aligned with GAMP. All we did was take what GAMP did a lot of great work in developing and just focused it. This is it. Come see here what's going on. But the idea of bringing all those groups together will help build more of that collective voice coming out, so that we aren't in this state that we're seeing ourselves in now with this guidance, right? This is great, it's a CDRH thing, but how does CDER feel? How does CBER feel? Everybody will start to be more aligned as we move forward with this, and it is just a process, but those groups are starting to be pulled together, initiated within that Center of Excellence activity.
That's great. Thank you, Cisco. I think this is another point of view. There's a question coming from one of the audience. It's more on the implementation. They are ready to get into CSA, but the question is, will that be a major overhaul on their SOPs and trainings, because they already have the CSV based thinking on the current company, right? So how do we go about implementing CSA if they want to implement CSA without making major changes to their SOPs or trainings? Ken, if you can provide your thought on.
So, first off, it doesn't require revision. We're talking about the same ultimate domain of knowledge. They can quickly. First and foremost, I think I would look, if you're going now, I would definitely get the GPG, Data Integrity by Design. And see what's there, because it'll give you context, some history, some examples, and enough for you to get started along the path. And if it were me, I would then be looking at, doing this at the val plan level, at the individual plan level, as opposed to trying to, think linearly and go like, well, hey, I got to change all these SOPs. Typically, the val plan already has enough flexibility for an individual system, such that would be the point where I would implement the change and make sure. And when we went on our journey, we did a retrospective analysis of our data to make sure that as we adjusted our approach, that we would not have introduced errors into production. And we really went there. One thing I do want to loop back on this, though, is what we've done in CSV is we've created a priority inversion where the paperwork has become more important than the system.
Yes.
That, I can give you some examples. Like people want to, when you say like, hey, let's use automation to do the testing, they say like, no, I want to qualify that. And I say like, wait, you're going to create a whole separate other, documentation effort for the automation, and understand that every time, typically we buy commercial off-the-shelf software. And every time that user interface changes, you got to heal your automation scripts. And then now you got to re-qualify them and test them and document them again. So you've created a burden that prevents you from doing it. Instead, what you should be doing is just fixing them, running the scripts, and then reviewing the results. What people want to say is, I push this button, and it says, hey, everything's okay, I don't have to review the results. And then they create this whole burden. So they move away from the essence. And then with the interesting thing that I'm finding, because I'm the biggest advocate of CSA, is leveraging the work you've already done, whether that's internal, whether, as Ray was talking about at the event, there's no point in repeating it. And what's fascinating is the fixation with documentation. We've gotten to the point where we could test the system, we could do the final run, and there are no issues. And then now people want to say, like, well, hey, that looks too perfect. When the inspector comes in, we want to see some mistakes. So they want to go to the earlier runs, like, that were done before. And it's like, well, why? We are showing you right now that the system works as expected. And this is where that thinking is stuck on the paper, and we're getting away from the intent. The intent is all about the patient. The intent is about safety. The intent is about quality. Taking that step back. So as you move forward in the journey, keep that in your mind. What is most important? Everyone participating should be able to see that it is value added. Right? When you test your software that goes right for your banking and insures your payroll, we don't think that that's a quote unquote necessary evil. We think that's good in ensuring that I get paid properly. So I don't lose fractions of pennies every time.
So again, on this one, right? So if you think about the scripted testing or unscripted, particularly the unscripted testing, there are a lot of questions coming from the audience, right? How do you document it? And or if I'm using unscripted testing, do I need to train them more? It's a different set of skill set, right? The modern testing, use of modern testing is a different skill set than the validation SMEs.
Correct.
So if you can touch, and I want also Khaled's view on it as well after Ken.
So unscripted that's a broad class of testing. If you're really thinking, if you pick up any software engineering book and you look at testing, that's a very broad definition. In there's exploratory, there's ad hoc, right? There's all different techniques. Now, when you look at that, so for like looking at these questions, if you're thinking about the ad hoc is like, I'm generally going to use it for something that's of low risk, right? Navigation sort of things. And I'm going to tell you when it doesn't work. I'm going to say, like, hey, I tested the lows, tested this area, whatever it is. It's by affidavit. Yes, I did it because it's a low risk area. I don't need to capture a whole bunch of screenshots or rigorous execution, but I do record a log saying when it doesn't work. If you go up a layer and you start looking at, say, like an unscripted as general as a class, then you're saying like it's more directed. So it's kind of like a series of ad hoc. Well, hey, rather than just saying I hit all the lows, I'm going to hit, document approval. I'm going to hit, this document reporting. I'm going to hit, basically, it's a series of use cases that are significant enough such that I want to say I hit each one of those. But again, the documentation is still affidavit, and I'm still saying when it doesn't work, similarly, but I'm able to trace each one of those events such that I have the comfort. There's enough granularity there such that I feel comfortable. And that's a spectrum, right? I mean, there really is a huge spectrum, because I'm looking to my side, but unfortunately I moved my testing books to the other side. I was going to pull up like stacks of testing books.
So on that one, so how do you think about the skill set that are needed? So what do you think about, what is your thought on that?
The skill set, it's different, right? If you really look at it, most validation professionals, right, you dry run the testing until the test case can't find any issues, which actually is you dry run it till it has no value. What we've emphasized there is your ability to write nice test cases. We've emphasized your ability to write nice test plans and nice protocols. What we've de-emphasized is the critical thinking necessary to actually test and analyze and find issues, right? Validation is measured, success is measured by the number of test cases that run without issue. Testing is measured successfully by the number of defects you find, and then the severity of those defects, right? They feel that they add value when a higher level issue is detected. And that is actually more important to safety and quality.
That's a good point. And then Khaled, so what is your, if you want to add anything, yeah?
I'll add, I know Cisco wanted to say something, but I'll say just one thing here, just looking at the question. We used to be under the impression you can write test cases so someone from the street can come in and really test them. That really doesn't really happen, right? And we write all these test cases and they have all kind of errors. And Ken is referring really to all the defects that you have to deal with. And just imagine you're creating a defect for a typo. Now that typo is going to take you probably half a day to get through this darn thing to restart your testing. So again, the idea is focus on the high risk, right? This is your scripted testing. Unscripted and ad hoc should be really exercised throughout your software development lifecycle, operation and maintenance, right? Again, validation doesn't really stop at that project. And think about the nightmare of maintaining the system moving forward as you get into change controls, periodic review, etc. Why are you digging a big hole for yourself, right? So again, I just wanted to make that point because I'm looking at the questions and, well, how do I do unscripted testing? Look, do a freehand. You can write anything. Unscripted does not mean undocumented. So we need to make sure, right? Because at the end of the day, you owe it to the regulatory agencies or notified body that you have to provide objective evidence. So yes, your requirements, your testing, etc. And then one more about your original question: how do you really start the implementation? I'm just going to give you one tip. Start with your risk approach, your risk tolerance to your organization. There is a bigger thing than CSA. It's the cultural piece of it. Is the organizational change management, right? So I'll stop here, pass it on to Cisco.
Cisco, yeah.
No, I think you hit on something that I wanted to make sure I highlighted and throughout the questions, right? The idea that unscripted does not mean undocumented, right?
Yes.
That principle, that foundation, even within these cases of ad hoc, right? We talked about that within, the guidance and one of the examples that we always talk about. Here is what we care about from, regulator, even audit standpoint, right? It's the idea of, what's this being used for? What risk does that present? Okay, what was relevant to test? What got tested? What did you do? What disposition came out of it? Everything worked great. We had a couple issues. We went back and retested this or did that. We chose that we were going to implement the system. It met our need and fulfilled its intended use. And we're confident that it will continue to fulfill its intended use. That's really what we're talking about from a documentation standpoint. And the ability to explain to an auditor, to a regulator, anyone else, here is why, from a risk standpoint, we stand by this. That is really what we're looking at, right? And I don't think any regulator will challenge that to say, hey, no, maybe you should be doing more of this because I disagree, right? That's a different discussion that needs to happen individually within the, you and the auditor, or in some cases, maybe that needs to be brought up within the, escalated up within the chain where things like the Digital Health Center of Excellence might help out with clarifying that piece. The idea of, ad hoc, unscripted, whether it is exploratory, and then there's a difference, right? And then Ken mentioned there's a million different ranges of that in between, more experiential training, testing. That's where you start to bring in a little bit more of that skill set. Maybe beforehand, you just need, how are people going to use it? How are people going to break it? We want to see that piece. This opens up a window of additional tools that are valid, applicable, that you can utilize for the case that you're trying to really gain confidence around, right? Oftentimes, the issue isn't in the scripts running behind it to test all the variables and buttons. It is, you've got a changeover from one operator to the next who's not familiar with it, and they click the wrong thing. Okay, that's where the issue occurs, not in all the other scripts that were done. So how do you understand the impact of that? How do you really test for that? That's part of what we're trying to look at and enable here. It's thinking through what are really where my potential problems may occur. And these unscripted tools give you a lot better window and access into those behavioral elements than you do with the scripted ones. So that's really a lot of what we are trying to get at and enable a bit more, especially when you're talking about a lot of stuff that is coming off the shelf, right? whether it is even just configured a bit more or customized, it all boils down to the same thing. And these tools are probably a lot more applicable in that space.
So that's great. Thank you, Cisco. Quick one. Ken, you want to comment on the auditor one?
Yeah, no, there's a question here talking about like, hey, what do I do? I can do this, but I'm still going to be faced by external audit. Coming from the CRO side of the business where we got constantly audited and everyone always wants to apply their methodology, right? It really comes back down to having your interpretation, having your structure, right? You look at scope and application, that you have a documented rationale for your approach. You implement, this is how we interpret, validation as a whole. This is how we implement it. And then that next step, right? Is it enough? You can use your metrics, you can use your system, right? You can show that you're going to achieve those. And, I used to implement systems. We had like 8 weeks from start to end, to production to get launched because clinical moves faster. If you come, someone coming from, an ERP type implementation and more of these monolithic applications that take months, if not years to implement, they have a very different perspective. Our life cycle was documented, it was different, and it worked for us. So we were able to defend it. Much like when you go down the CSA path for the person with the first asking that earlier question about starting out small, you implement something that works. What the worst thing that I want people to do is say, this is what people do actually. This is just a pet peeve, right? Because it becomes so difficult or so challenging from the self-inflicted amount of documentations or the priority inversion, people then start saying, let me just leverage 100% vendor testing because they want to get out of doing the work altogether, as opposed to doing value-added testing themselves. Right? They're not mutually exclusive if you can leverage it legitimately, but it shouldn't be leveraging vendor testing 100% because I'm too busy or this is too much work or to try to get out. What it is to protect your business. And someone asked a question on automation, right? You build the automation scripts using good engineering practices such that those scripts work. You maintain them to make sure they work, especially for software as a service where they push it to you. You make your scripts, you run your scripts, you review the results. Or you can have a sheet that said like, hey, yeah, we ran it. These are the issues. Oh, we had to tweak it because the inputs were off, and you fix it because something changed in the release. And trust me, if anyone has done automation, as soon as the user interface moves around, you got to heal your scripts.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Ken, good segue to Ray quickly. Ray, what is your thinking on how you actually approach the vendor assurance, right? What is with respect to CSA, because the basic assurance is largely from the vendor-based documentation, right? So what is your thought on that? Because there are questions coming from vendor side. What is acceptable from a biopharma company on a vendor? So can you provide insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about in my experience. So like when I go to look at a vendor, what am I looking for, or what would I like to see? I'd like to see if they have some certifications, like they're ISO 9001 certified. That's great. Look at their life cycle. Is their life cycle robust and good and controlled? Am I looking at process improvements? I'm looking at the testing that they're doing. Are they doing what they're saying that they're doing, and are they open and kind of transparent in their dealings around that? And that give me a warm, fuzzy feeling that I can take, I will say, a lot of their testing to what Ken said to the bank, but I can't take it all to the bank. It's like, I would nearly do glorified regression testing on what I get from the vendor then at a minimum. But I can also, like, if I'm looking at a vendor and I feel that they're deficient in a particular area, that's an area for me to beef up on in my testing then. So it really helps me make an informed decision on how to frame my validation. So I could say, I don't know who sent the question in that they were a supplier. Like the suppliers, this isn't going to force the suppliers to do anything different than what they're doing today. It just, if they're doing a good job, it makes our life easier because we can take some of that savings to the bank. So it'll make our life easier.
Yeah. Anyone to add, Khaled or Cisco or Ken, on that vendor side?
I guess I would ask either Ken or you or Ray, because we develop software as well. So if we use CSA, will you just ignore us? Or these guys are using CSA, I don't want to use them?
That's a cheeky question, Khaled.
It is a cheeky question, Khaled. So
you know, I mean, just to add on though, you're looking at really good engineering practices. I mean, first and foremost, and you're looking at that. I mean, the interesting about pharma, right? If it's a big company who's not going to let you through the door, like Microsoft, regardless of what the risk is, we tend to be okay with it.
Yeah,
and
you know, at the end of the day, it's really all about controls, and I think Ray alluded to it. If you see controls, right, no matter who you are, whether you're a regulatory agency, notified body, internal inspector, if you see controls in place and someone doing their job, right, I think their work is warranted. So,
yeah, go ahead, Khaled. Yeah.
No, I think we're just out of time, so I just wanted to give some words to Cisco or somebody else. So I'll be quiet.
Oh yeah. I think one point I think just want to talk about is I'll leave the final minutes to Cisco to close it out. So with respect to what we have heard, right? We talk about critical thinking. We talk about the vendor documentation, types of scripting. At the end of the day, I think based on my own experience and the SMEs also alluded to it is the culture, right? The culture is one of the big things that needs to be moved. So start small. That's always the best way to work. You don't need to phenomenally change what you're already doing. CSV is not going away. It's just the way how we actually apply. And with that, I want to give final minutes to Cisco to close this and wrap this panel.
Yeah, so I want to thank all of you guys for the engagement, the work. There were a lot of great questions to help really cement still some of the stuff that we need to tackle from an education standpoint moving forward. But I think you guys have done a great job really conveying the message that this is doable. This is not anything that is a concern. And for a lot of companies who are feeling, what does the auditor say? I would suggest that, they reach out. Maybe we could connect them with ones who've already gone through the experience and see, hey, it works. It's not a concern or a question. But I think the more we continue to get the message out, and I appreciate all the knowledge sharing and the engagement that you guys have offered and are really bringing to the community moving forward, because I think that this is something that will drive a significant change. I think especially in the direction of where, from an agency, we want to really try to be.
Brilliant. Super. Thank you, Cisco, Ken, Ray, and Khaled. This concludes our panel discussion. Have a wonderful day and good conference.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senthil.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you to you, our valued listeners. We want to hear your thoughts and questions on this topic. Also, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe in your podcast player of choice so you never miss an episode. Tune in next week to continue the learning when we invite David Nettleton to be our guest, delivering a consultant's look at CSA with feedback and tips to the session you just heard. You can find out more by visiting ivtnetwork.com or by emailing customerservice@ivtnetwork.com. Thank you again, and we'll see you next week here on Voices in Validation.